In this video, I'll be sharing with you a requested tutorial on how to cut and sew a tight hip and butt padding tutorial. So if this is something you like, let's dive right into today's video. So first, I'm using a 1/2 inch foam. Now, I want to take my hip from 40 to 42. That's why I'm making use of 1/2 inch foam. If I want to add extra 4 inches to my hip, I'll be making use of 1 inch foam, right? So let's start drafting our pattern. So the first step you need to take is to go ahead to mark from your waist down to your tight length. That is the short length of your hip padding. Now I'm using 14 inches. Now this 14 inches is the shortest that your tight can be. Your tight can be shorter than 13 because from the waist to the butt to the under butt part of your body is 13 inches. Now after marking that, after getting the length of your tight, mark your waist, and then I'm going to mark 8 inches for the hip line. After that 8 inches, I'll go ahead to draw a straight line. After marking that line for my hip point, I'm going to go ahead to find my crotch. Now you can do that by dividing your hip circumference by 4, or if you divide your hip by 4, you add extra 1 inch to your measurement, or you can sit on a flat surface, measure from your waist down to the hard surface. So here's my crotch of 11 inches. Now after marking this, right, I'm going to go ahead to mark my hip circumference divided by 4. My hip is 40, divided by 4, I have 10. Now the foam I'm using is 1/2 inch. That means I'm adding 1/2 inch to my tight or trouser pattern. Then I'll now add extra 1 inch for sewing allowance. This 1 inch means we're using 1/2 inch on both sides to join our trouser. When you're making a trouser or short, you're not going to use much allowance. Now that measurement I have on my hip plus my sewing allowance and the extra 1/2 inch for the foam, which is for the hip padding, I'll mark and take my measurement straight to the upper part. Now I'll also mark that measurement on the crotch line of my trouser, and I will mark. Now for my front crotch extension, to get that measurement is your hip circumference divided by 16, which will give me 2.5. Now if you don't want to use that measurement, divide your hip by 4. Now whatever you get again, like if I divide my hip by 4 now, what I'll get is 10. That 10 inches, I'll divide it by 4 again. It will now give me the same 2.5 inches. After marking the 2.5 inches for my crotch extension, I'll just go up a bit by 1 inch or 1.5. Now I'm going to go ahead to place to draw out my crotch curve for my trouser, and I will connect. So mine is not so fantastic. I'm just going to go with anything that is okay. I'm not really good at this part, at the crotch. So after I'm done connecting, so now I'll take the total length starting from that crotch to the end. So what I have, I'll divide it into 2. Then I'll go ahead to place my ruler and draw a straight line. Now the next step is to go ahead to find your tie line. So your tie line is usually 2 inches after your crotch. Now on my tie line, I'm going to measure my tie, like measure your lap round. That's like your tie area. What I have is 22 inches, and I'll add extra 1 inch for joining, making it 23. So that 23 inches, I'll divide it by 2. What I'll have is 11.5. Now this 11.5, I will share it equally on both sides. So to do that, I'll fold my tape into 2 to find the midpoint. So I'll share one part of the 11.5 on this side and then mark the rest here, right? I'm sharing it from the center line. Next is to measure where your tight will stop. Round that point, measure it. Now after measuring mine, what I got was 20 inches, and I'll add extra 1 inch, that is half inch for joining on both sides. So 21, if you divide it by 2, you have 10.5 inches. Now this 10.5 inches, I'll place the midpoint of 10.5 and I'll share it on both sides of my pattern. So after that, I'll just go ahead to place, that is mark half of the 10.5 inches on one side and mark the remaining here. Now I'll go ahead to connect this and also connect this towards this side. So I'll just blend it out so that I don't have any breakage on that point, and I'll connect this part also. Now after I'm done connecting, on the waist I'll come in by 1 inch here and I'll go ahead to connect. Now why I'm connecting it is because I don't want the waistline to tilt towards one side. So from here I'll mark my waist circumference divided by 4. My waist is 28 divided by 4. I have 7 inches, right? And I'll add extra 1 inch for sewing allowance, which will give me 8 inches, because I'll use half inch to join on one side and half inch on the other side. So sorry for the noise at the background, it is actually my neighbors. Now I'll connect from that point to my hip point. Now this is a very important part. You want to blend it out very well to avoid your short pattern to have ear. Now if your pattern should have ear, when you fix your hip padding, it will have ear. So now any error you make on your trouser or your tight pattern will affect the actual hip padding. So now you see I'm trying to blend up the hip points, which I'll also try to like adjust so that the hip padding won't have ear. So if you have error in your trouser pattern or your tight pattern, your padding will also have that same issue, right? Now I'll go ahead to cut this out, and after I'm done cutting out, we'll be drafting out the back. Now to draft the back, I'll place my pattern, and in front I'll be adding 2 inches. So I'll just go ahead to add 2 inches to this part and I will connect. So while connecting, I'll try to like blend it off, blend the line off so that it won't come out looking slanted. So I'll mark out the extension. So for the extension of the back, I'll use 2 inches. So there's a formula for that, but 2 inches is okay. Except you're a plus size, you should consider using like 2.5 or 3. Like when I mean plus size, someone that is very big, you're going to use 3 inches. So I'll just go ahead to connect. Now after I'm done connecting, the upper part I'll go up by 2 inches, that is after the actual length. Now I'll measure my waistline, which is 8 inches. I'll place my tape and make sure I have 8 inches this way, right? Slant it, make sure I have like 8 inches. And what I will do is to go ahead to reconnect it back to the hip point of my pattern. Now you can actually add a dart to the back and then go ahead to shape it out later. Now I'll blend out the front part, then place and make sure that what I have here will connect to the hip point. Now I forgot to also do this while I was making my show it in the video. I later did it offline. Make sure that what you have from the waist to the hip point of the back pattern is the same from the waist to the hip point of the front pattern. Now at the front part of my trouser, I'll just add 1 inch at this part and blend it out. You can also add 1.5. So I don't want any case of my trouser being free at this side. It's supposed to be tight on this part, like your pattern should be well fitted on your body, apart from the hip area where you added ½ inch, so that by the time you fix your pad, it will fit directly on your body very well. If not, the hip padding will be loose and the aim of padding your hip will not be there again. Your hip padding is supposed to be fitted on the body so that when you put on your dress, it won't be showing by the side that you're wearing, probably you're wearing a hip padding or something inside. So I went ahead to trace it out, and now we're going to mark out our hip padding. But first, I use this pattern to cut out my fabric. I'm using a very lightweight fabric. I just got 1 yard in the market. It's actually a crepe, but it is very light, like it is very light. I cut it so that by the time you make your hip padding, it will relax on your body very well. For my hip padding, from the hip, I'll come out by 5.5 inches. Now you can go ahead to connect it to this midpoint, but I'm using 5.5 inches. From the top, I'll come down by 1 inch and I'll go ahead to connect it. So after that, the next step I'll take is to place my tape from that point, and I'll mark 13 inches. So how I got that 13 inches is to place your tape and measure from your back to the under bust part of your bum bum, like under of your bum bum, what you have. So I have a moderate butt, so when I measured mine, I have 13. So I'll be using 13, and in most hip padding, you normally use 13 inches, unless the person's bum bum is very big. You can go ahead to measure. So I'll just go ahead and mark out my crotch, my thigh line, and also my hip line. I went ahead to make a mark to indicate those areas. Now, starting from the hip part of this pattern, I'm going to measure 7.5 inches and I will mark. Now, after marking that 7.5, I'll come down by 1 inch and I'll go ahead to connect to that 7.5 I have here. Now, after marking that, from my thigh line, I'll come out by 3.5. So when I was marking, instead of marking 3.5, I mistakenly marked 3 inches and I connected. But I went ahead to reconnect it, right? And I measured that 13 inches, which is almost at the length of my tight, and I'll go ahead to connect. So after connecting, I wasn't okay with what I have, because after measuring, I found out that I went out by 3 inches from my thigh line instead of 3.5. So I'll just go ahead to connect and then measure the 13 inches and connect it back to it. Now I'll go ahead to cut this out, and I'll be using it to cut out my hip padding. So after cutting this out, I'll be transferring all this pattern now to my foam, and I'll be cutting 2 pieces each. So you also want to label your pattern so that in case you get confused along the line, you can use the pattern as a guide and know where the pattern is supposed to be. Now this is my foam and I traced out 2 pieces. Now if you notice on my pattern, I went ahead to label it, right? I labeled it, and also for this part, this will help me not to misplace my pattern at all. Now for the sides of this foam, I'm going to chop it out so that it will be flat. Now you can also use a fiber. So I have a foam at home, that's why I'm making use of a foam. Now if you're making a trouser hip and butt padding and you're a beginner, please go ahead and use a fiber. It's easier to work with a fiber, and it's easier to achieve the hip and butt padding effect with a fiber for a tight or trouser hip padding. Unless you're making for a skirt, you can go ahead to use this foam. You can also use your fiber for the skirt, but a fiber is more easier. Now because of this hip and butt padding will be on the tight material, now instead of using a woven hairstay, to cover it up. I'll use an actual lining so that later I can weave it round, and when I weave it round I can easily wear it and wash it whenever I want to make use of it. So I'm covering it with a lining. I cut out a lining, placed hemming gum on it, placed the foam and placed back hemming gum and placed the lining. Now I'll go ahead to iron it out. So you can easily cut out the excess, weave it round and attach to your tights. That way you can easily wash it. But if you're using like a woven fabric, I feel like you need to like cover it again. Now I'll just go ahead to iron, and I'll be tracing out the excess that I don't need. Now I will repeat this for all the 4 foams that I have cut out. So this is what it looks like at this point. I'll go ahead to cover the rest of the foam, and after I was done covering it, this is what I have. Now we'll be using one part to show. Now I placed my hip and butt padding this way, measured 1 inch from the waistline. Now I forgot to mention, for your trouser you will add 1 inch at the lower part for folding, and then add extra ½ inch on top because I went to bias the waistline of my own. I didn't add a band to it. Now measure 1.5 on top and then place your hip padding. Then after that I went ahead to stitch it round. Now if you don't want to stitch it directly to your tight, go ahead to stitch your hip and butt padding first, stitch the sides of your tights and then place it and stitch. But if you want to save time, because it's more like achieving the same result, you can just join it at once and stitch. But you have to be careful when doing this. Now I've stitched the both sides. What I'll do is I'll place the front side, the crotch, join with ½ inch. Then for the back, I'll also go ahead to join it, leave little space on top to add my zipper, and I'll join with ½ inch. Now after I'm done joining with ½ inch, I'm going to go ahead to bias the waistline round. I will go ahead to bias it. I'll use a bias to turn the waistline. Now I've gone ahead to use like the same fabric. I cut out the same fabric to bias the waistline of this hip and butt tight. Now is to join the center part of the trouser. Place it this way and you now stitch with ½ inch. So after I was done stitching, I added the zipper, and this is what it looks like. Now if you notice that this fabric is light and it can easily relax on the body, so this is what the hip and butt padding looks like. So I'm supposed to wear this, but considering the fact that it is like a tight, so I can't really wear a tight online and start showing you. So this is the final result.